Hi, I'm Zeke Torres, and I am here with Jason Brinkley. Jason, thank you so much for joining us today. Jason is the president of the Southeast SAS Users Group, regional users group. So, Jason, thank you.
It's great to be here.
Awesome. Well, I came up with this idea of having this PROC gossip to really reach out to key people in our SAS community and hear from them about what's coming up, what they are able to manage and control, but what they can share with us, what they can tell us about their area, their community, or their user group base. Um, Talk to us about what's going on with you with Southeast SAS Users Group. I know that recently there's been some developments with call for papers. What can you tell us?
Well, so Southeast SAS Users Group has always been a fairly popular regional group. Our purview's traditionally been the Southeast United States, starting somewhere around Washington, D.C., and running down towards near the Gulf Coast uh, on some things. We support users in that region. We typically have a general focal point on that as a yearly conference. And COVID has helped uproot some of all of that. So this year we find ourselves in a unique situation in that we are not doing the traditional in-person conferences this year. We're actually going completely virtual. So our website is www.sesug.org. So you can go and check that information yourself. But the call for papers is open. We are going to try to plan a virtual conference that has a lot of the same trappings of what would be in our traditional in-person conference. So if you haven't been to a user group meeting before, they're usually, the hallmarks are that there are some sort of workshops or tutorials, and then there's papers and presentations given by SAS users, mostly content for SAS users by SAS users. And then there is some generous support from SAS. So we definitely appreciate that, and they tend to send some speakers and some materials and stuff to be on hand for users and different things. I would say the attendance of a SESUG runs somewhere between 300 and 500 people, so it's not a global forum for those things. And the real focal point is just giving an opportunity for users to get together to share their experiences in a couple of different ways. And so now we're in the time of COVID, and we're pushing that to a virtual platform. And lots of conferences are going virtual, so we're kind of seeing what's going on with the landscape, and some of what is in the SESUG hallmark is not really as workable in the virtual environment. So one of the things that we're really being challenged with this year is putting how much of that will translate, and what new opportunities does this give us in terms of working on that.
So now you're growing your team. I mean, okay, so there's a couple of challenges that you have here that I'm aware of that I don't know that some of the common or regular SAS users are aware of, or even just new to SAS users. But your area probably shouldn't be called Southeast SAS Users Group. I mean, it's different now, right? Tell us about that. I mean, it's gone from Southeast to just East. So what's happening there?
So yeah, so the regional groups used to be pretty well defined with a southeast group and a northeast group, and NESUG called it quits a few years back. They folded up shop, and I would say that where we're at right now is that the user group support for the Northeast corridor has become pretty city specific, and they're fantastic. The things that the Boston area SAS Users Group is doing is fantastic. Phyllis SUG is doing great stuff. DC SUG is doing great stuff. The Cincinnati SUG, I'm sure I'm leaving some other folks out, but there's become sort of a set of individual cities that have their own user group things, and some of them are running very, very strong on some things. The challenge for us then is, we welcome those users to come help and be engaged. And a lot of the issue that becomes paramount with the regional user groups is that the host site, right? So these are designed so that you pick a city, you pick a place, something that the users in that region can get to pretty easily, that the travel costs are somewhat lower. It inspires certain businesses that wouldn't make a big showing for things that might send a person for a smaller opportunity where they can get some networking and learning in all of that. And you're right that now in terms of regional support, you pretty much have the entire Eastern Corridor open for all of that. And I think one thing that we're seeing is that those cities are doing such great jobs within their own groups, but they're not as connected with one another because there isn't a regional user group for all of that. And this is part of the SESUG evolution, is not necessarily to say we want to be ESUG and just take the entire corridor to all, but are they getting enough support? Is there something that we can do to help? Is there ways to collaborate and do all of that? And I think that might end up being the future for a lot of the user groups. I think the tradition has been the regions kind of work in their own silos to support the users that are in that geographic purview. But I think, especially now in the time of COVID, we're not the only user group meeting that's going to be virtual. So now if you've got a whole bunch of the user group meetings that are going virtual and you have great content from people like SESUG that are pushing out their content online, then the question then starts to become like, why is SESUG? Like if the geography is not the barrier anymore, then is that one of the things that COVID is creating an opportunity in? And that's something that we're not completely sure on yet, what's going to permeate outside of all of it. But I think one of the things the SESUG EC is talking about is, we don't want our virtual event, which will be hosted this year in October, we don't want that to necessarily just be a one-off. Like we just had to go virtual and we did virtual and then we're going to come back. How do we expand that? How do we get, what pieces of that can we keep? Is there a mechanism in there that we can continue to support users in all of those things? And then what are the rest of those user groups going to do? And I think it forces us all to start thinking about collaborating more to have a common model, because if we don't, we're going to end up being competitive. We're all many of them are going to be online, and somebody's going to say, well, I just saw that talk online with SESUG. I don't know that I necessarily need to register for SESUG if that presenter is going to bring the same content and the same stuff over again. So
I think it's interesting times. I think that a lot of the regionals and a lot of the people involved in the leadership roles of either locals or regionals are trying to figure it out, in one way or another. And it's one of the reasons why I felt it was necessary to reach out and talk to people like you, team members, right, fellow leaders, and how do we share this between each other, right? Because not only are your SESUG constituents interested in what's happening to the region and what's coming up with SESUG itself, but yet other regionals are also like, what are they doing? Because we'd like to do the same. And I think everybody's trying to look at each other, but nobody realizes everybody's standing around in the walls, right? Nobody's dancing. And I think it's one of the reasons why I'm interested in trying to get to every group and talk to them and see what they're up to. So you're putting good effort into getting SESUG launched for the fall. Your call for papers is open. Who are the people that you need within your region to come join the team and see if they can start to share what they need to make this happen? What are you looking for? What are those resources you're looking for?
Oh, that is a terrific question. So let me make sure I get my thoughts around this good. We need new users, right? So one thing that we have found SESUG to historically have issues with, and I think other user groups have said some of this as well, is that roughly 20 to 30% of our attendees in the face-to-face conferences every year, it is their first SESUG, it is their first user group meeting. They are pretty new to SAS. And I think one of the things that all of the user groups are struggling with is identity with the users. It seems in the past, I would say maybe 10 years or so, that this sort of new generation of SAS users have a harder time thinking of themselves as SAS professionals. So this is something that we've started talking about within SESUG is, well, what's the differentiator? At what point do you just stop thinking of yourself as somebody who uses a piece of software versus, and that's just one aspect of a larger job, versus somebody that says, no, I'm a SAS professional. This is something that I want to be known for being for doing that. That this is something that I put on my resume as a differentiator. And I think that now opening up the realms with data science and other open source software, I think that there's a lot of users that are not thinking of themselves in that realm of a SaaS professional sort of thing. And where that has downstream impact is in their returning to certain conferences like SESUG, or deciding that they're going to have a volunteer role, or that they want to get more embedded deeply within those user group communities. And the perception that I hear all the time from folks is that, well, I have stuff, but it's not really novel. It's not really unique. They tend to think of user group conferences like academic conferences, and that you have to put a paper together that's something new and fresh and original and all that. That's not what SAS user groups are about. It's about sharing experiences. And if you figured out a way to do something a little bit faster for you, there are certainly good online archives of thousands and tens of thousands of user group papers, but that online archive doesn't replace that personal connection that you get from presentations and seeing somebody else demo something or talk about something or active projects on some things and all of that. And so even if the content, if you don't feel like it's fresh, if it was a time saver or something that really added value to your work, then we need that to be shared. And I think that our SAS professional class of folks understand that. But I don't think that our junior SAS users that aren't really at a place yet that really think of themselves as a SAS professional are really getting that message that we want that content across the entire spectrum. If I had sessions that were nothing but fresh-faced SAS users demoing things that somebody that's used SAS for 30 years already knew, I would not complain about any of that, because then my audience is going to identify with those folks. Those
so let me stop you there.
Totally different.
Let me stop
Yep.
you there, because I think
Yep.
you're saying something important. I want
Yep.
the people listening to understand part of the message.
Yes, sir.
You have a group that knows the value of SAS in the community part, and so they will work their way to present and speak and join this SAS community. And what you're saying is that your group and your team is seeking people who may not be committed to SAS, but who have ideas of what they want to contribute. And you're open and seeking contributions, volunteership, ideas, and input from somebody who's maybe 1 to 2 years of experience in SAS and has no experience in the user group conferences. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, we need more of those. We absolutely need more of those. Lots of people are starting to see SAS user groups as a very small tent for things that it's almost niche. And I think that the SAS professional class say, no, it's not really. And there's a gap, and the gap is growing. And the only way to close that gap is to reach out and just be like, hey, we need you. We need you specifically. We need students. We need junior professionals. We need folks that are interested in it, and those that are casual users. They may use it every day for their job, but it's part of a bigger thing. They're interested in growing their talents on some things, but they would be willing to share something, but they don't think that what they have to share is novel or sophisticated enough. Like, that's not what this is about.
Okay.
And I don't think that message permeates very well. I think that what we have, especially in the time of webinars, is we have a lot of webinars with that upper echelon content. Like, here's something new, here's something fabulous, here's something everybody's going to need, use, and enjoy, because you only have maybe one speaker for a webinar or two or whatever. But when you shift this to sort of the conference thing, we want to run 4 or 5 concurrent tracks running simultaneously with lots of different content and lots of different user opportunities and different things. Let me tell you one more thing that we're going to lean into a little bit more this year. Now, the SESUG EC, when I told them that we were going to do this, the only feedback I got from them is, well, don't give away the farm. Like, if we're putting together great stuff and it's, you reveal all of our great stuff early on, then everybody else is going to pick it up and say, we're going to do that too. But here's one that I'm especially proud of. we're doing a set of sessions called Soft Skills Aren't Soft. And these are going to be talks, presentations around the other things related to your development as a SAS professional. So we're talking about those things that help that person get from the level of being a SAS user to being a SAS professional. Or maybe you want to be an independent consultant on things. Or maybe you are managing a team of SAS users and you need to talk about effective communication and management strategies that work well for groups of programmers. Or maybe you're co-programming with other folks. And so there's a little bit of leadership in there. There's a little bit of team development. There's a little bit of communication. And that's the kind of thing that our groups kind of set to the side and said, well, for programmers and SAS users, they're generally a very smart and very well, a really good group of individuals to work with on things, but working with a group of SAS programmers is different than working with a group of other professionals, people that are not that combination of tech and data savvy on some things. And there's not enough of that dialogue in terms of, well, how is it different working with those folks? What is the good strategies? How do you mitigate circumstances where you have a junior SAS professional and a senior SAS professional working together and there's conflict in some of it? Like, those resolutions, those are all things that these users, our community, works with on a day-to-day basis. But I think a lot of times people look at SAS user groups as the sharing of SAS programming and SAS skills, when there's so much more to it in terms of being a SAS professional.
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, one of the things I believe when you really get to know more about SAS is that there's different components to learn.
Mm-hmm.
And although it's my preferred tool, I'm often doing half of my job in something that has nothing to do with SAS. SAS is just 50% of something. The other 50% is an entirely different management skill technique. It has nothing to do with software. Sometimes it's something else. So let's also take a look at this next part, which is if somebody doesn't have conference experience or user group experience, because they're focusing on the fact that you're asking for new to SAS, you're also saying you can be new to the conference process. You don't have to have come to a conference before. You're calling for help. You're calling for input and ideas. How are they going to get the help? Is your team committed to guiding and mentoring them? And we're in a second, we're going to talk about SAS. SAS helps with their resources as well. But tell us about the help that your team is providing to these new recruits, these new volunteers.
Well, so that's an area that we're still working on. I will say that I'll be completely transparent and say that those are things that we haven't gotten figured out yet. But one thing that we do know is that we have a lot of seasoned professionals with a lot of good working experience and a deep Rolodex on that side of things. And there hasn't been an instance yet where we have reached out to that Rolodex and they have turned us down. In terms of stuff, there are people that are willing to provide that mentoring, that provide that guidance. There's and I specifically have 2 or 3 people in my life that have reached out recently after we did some of our online things that we did last October, and they said, I'm thinking about SESUG, but I don't really know what to submit. And there are papers out there, in terms of stuff. SESUG had a great paper presentation a few years back about how. And the how is a typical section in the user groups on hands-on workshops. And there was a presentation on how to do a good how for people that understand how to use a particular software, but how to do a hands-on workshop and what kind of things you need to clear and do all of that. Like, those are the kind of things, like there's that learning at all levels, right? So, we're not just talking, you're talking about how to get new users to put in an abstract, and there's a lot of good information for some of that online. The translation to the paper, if you reach out to us, we will, sort of help you find the right resources and stuff for some of all of that. We can do that for a few. I don't know if we can do that for 500, 600, 700 people. It would thrill me if there was, that big an interest. I will also say that we've been thinking about how to do more outreach with universities, and there are some great faculty all through the country that are doing stuff with their students locally on some of all of that. I would love to figure out a way to sort of replicate some of that model in the industry and have some industry leads that would be willing to take folks on as mentors that don't work at the same company that they're at.
Sure.
For some of that. We got to have a good front end for that. We got to have volunteers that are willing to wrangle the people together to do all of that. You know, it's a big time investment. And with SESUG specifically, these are all potentially new directions for us. Again, our purview's been the yearly in-person, face-to-face conference and getting that worked out. And it's usually a pretty full-time thing for volunteers, sort of beyond like your 9 to 5 or whatever. You know, I think people that don't see enough of the user group stuff don't really recognize that none of those volunteers are getting paid, right? There's no, we have generous support from SAS, and we are extremely thankful for everything that they do for us in all of it. But you know, there's a limit there, right? They don't manage our registrations. They don't manage our call for papers. They don't review the papers to make sure that they're technically in the right format and all of that. They don't schedule our talks. They don't meet up with the authors of the papers to make sure that the schedules are all aligned, and that people that are presenting more than one thing aren't double booked in a certain place. Like when we have face-to-face conferences, there's all the negotiation with the hotel for all of that, all of our extracurricular events for things, you know, in the virtual realm right this second, we have to have a virtual platform, you know, and somebody has to figure out how to use it, keeping our website up to date. You know, I sent an email blast. If you were on the SESUG email blast, I sent a SESUG email blast in March that had some missteps in it. If you're in the SESUG email list, you know what I'm talking about. So I had to send a second retraction on that to say, you know, it's a mea culpa. Like I certainly wouldn't want to offend anybody but by some of that. But that's what happens when you have volunteers who are giving up of their time for stuff. And those same volunteers are willing to do more. They're willing to mentor. They're willing to talk through people how to get to that next level. But at the same time, you know, I think we're all struggling with how to close that gap.
Sure.
You know, to get those users that step up and say, I do want to do more. I do want to learn more. I do want to contribute. I do want to do those things, you know.
Yeah, no, I think that every group is kind of reevaluating how to bridge those things and what's important for each of the groups, and how to help the volunteers not necessarily get burnt out, but also give them the right resources. And I think you're right. I mean, one of the things that goes unsaid or seldom recognized is that SAS is supporting all these groups,
Yeah.
and provides great resources, but it's up to the groups to use those resources correctly. And I appreciate SAS for the commitment they have to the groups, but it's the groups that have to do these things for themselves and figure these things out and make it work with the volunteers and the team they have. So it's a tough job, you know, to really bridge.
Let me follow up on that since we brought in SAS here. So let's mention that for a second, because SAS does provide great support, but SAS also has a great, you know, conference called SAS Global Forum, right? And the Global Forum is their mechanism for getting everybody together. But I think that parts of the Global Forum model came from the user group model, in terms of stuff on how it evolved on some things, right? Global Forum, you know, some would say that was originally SUGI, and that there's some historical pieces to all of that. But you know, I think one of the challenges that the user groups at the local, regional, and all of those user groups are facing also is to not be in competition with Global Forum as well, you know, and to not be a mini Global Forum. You know, so because if you're a company and you're a SAS professional at a company, and your company says, you know what, I'm going to give you one trip a year, one conference a year, and your choices are a regional user group meeting or Global Forum, you know, lots of folks tend to say, well, I'm going to be at Global Forum because that is really the preeminent place to be for some of that. So I will say that the user groups, not that we're in competition, we're doing our own thing. We're trying to support those particular regions, but global forum is an additional challenge, and especially this year, because now we're thinking about, okay, well, we have a virtual event, we have virtual things that are going on, and SAS is posting a lot of videos, tutorials, and a lot of global forum is virtual, which makes groups like ours at least set and think about the idea: should we even have a conference this year? Should we even be trying to do some of these things for our community if global forum is going to have such a big reach? And that's not to say that it's in competition, but that's just another place where we are trying to figure some of those things out. And one of my visions on this, and again, I don't know that this, I'm not going to speak for the rest of the SESUG EC or the rest of the SESUG organization, but I do think that the local user groups and the regional user groups are great places for those new users to get those experiences and to build up that confidence if they don't feel like they're ready for global forum. Like, you know, and that's kind of how the trajectory used to be. You know, if you talk to the seasoned SAS professionals, that, you know, they say, well, that's how we kind of did it in the 90s and stuff, and sort of that build up and all of that. But, you know, the ease of access to global forum, and especially in the now with the virtual space, has sort of shrunk that gap between the need and the purview of the regionals and what global forum is doing, globally, internationally, right? And so we're more connected. So then the question then becomes, what's the value add? What can we do? What can we offer? And so we're continuing to explore those, and that's why we got to have that new input, because I need to hear. You know, I've been using SAS for close to 20 years, but I need somebody who's been using SAS for 2 years to say, you know, I went to Global Forum and I didn't get this, or I wish that I had gotten that, or I didn't feel prepared, or I didn't know quite what I was doing, you know. And then so they either have to go to a bunch of global forums, or they have to go someplace to learn, you know, how to make that next leap. And I feel like we should be that one of those mechanisms.
Yep, I do want to clarify for most of the people that are going to listen to this and be new to SAS, is that Global Forum is also a predominantly volunteer-driven organization, but it is separate from the regionals.
Yeah.
And Global Forum has traditionally been in the spring, and the regional groups traditionally meet in the fall. And the key reason historically for that is because this really small team at SAS in Cary, North Carolina, who supports user groups events, is worked so hard and so well at the production of Global Forum and the effort that it takes to do that, that they also somehow magically find the energy to tolerate local groups and regional groups. They just can't do it at the same time. So they have to do it in the fall. They have to do it some other time. But this team is like spectacular. And I was just talking to Chris Blake about this, is that there is, to my knowledge, not another software company out there that employs a team of people, however many there are at SAS. I think there's a dozen of them, I think. But these people's only job is to support the user group community, whatever that is. And so they are the producers of SAS Global Forum, the enablers, let's call them the enablers, and regionals and locals. And so that's distinct, because other software companies, that's baked in, that support is baked in a different way, where it doesn't feel the same as with the SAS user group community. That I could literally send an email or pick up the phone and have resources that are distinct with other software communities that are out there, other syntax stuff that's out there. This company is basically saying, what do you need to support your community? Tell us, and we're going to find a way to make that happen. That's what that team is there for. That's awesome.
I totally agree. And the other great thing about SAS, there's many great things, but the other great thing is that the leadership at all levels get it, right? I mean, going all the way up to Dr. Goodnight. I mean, there are certain features that SAS users use all the time in SAS that the code was written in the 70s by Dr. Goodnight himself. Like that's like, even now, like when he gets on stage and starts talking at Global Forum, like he knows what his company is doing at the implementation level. It's not with other software companies and other groups, there is sort of a division between the technical side and the the sales and delivery. But these teams understand their product, and but they also know that their products are only going to go as far as the usability and the user experience and the sort of user loyalty in some of those. And I think that's something that SAS has been extremely strong in terms
Yeah.
of some of that. So, and the great thing about you know, you don't really find the user group communities to be the same, not for a particular software, right? So, like I said, like early on, like, in the sort of 21st century realm of data science, you've got great data science meetup groups, you've got great data science and open source conferences and things of that sort, but they don't usually get the same level of support that you would have with the SAS user groups and the SAS Global Forum. And I think there's some people that think that is self-serving, that's just should be part of that's just part of SAS's business model. But I don't see it that way, right?
Yeah, it's
SAS
not.
could do well with just selling analytics, right?
Yeah, I
And
think
they do.
the difference is if SAS really wanted to make it salesy, they'd totally shut the users from deciding what content to have, right?
That's right. Right.
SAS is basically out of that content process
Yeah.
because it's a user group event. Otherwise, it would be a sales event, and then you would see the sales team picking what to talk about. And that, to me, is distinct because if you look
Absolutely.
at all of the other software companies and what they do, it's about what they sell.
That's right.
And this is about what we use.
Yeah. I'm going to be political for a second. I'm going to pick on the Gartner conferences about the AI and machine learning and advanced data science in Gartner. My experiences with that have been, half software users and half salesmancy in terms of companies that are like, you ought to pick us to do your analytics and stuff for them. You don't need to know how to do this stuff. You just need to know somebody who does know how to do this stuff. And we're people that know how to do this stuff. And that is a very different message than we know how to do this stuff, but we want to show you how to do this stuff. We want to teach you to fish, so to speak. But I will also say that one of the downsides is that for Global Forum is that Global Forum is big, and there's a lot of submissions, and the not everything that gets submitted gets accepted, and there is a modest rejection rate on some things. I will say that the acceptance rate for SESUG is fairly high. I won't say that it's perfect. It's not that we, take everything that we get, but I would say I would at least confidently. Again, the EC is going to be like, "Why'd you give this number away?" But I would say that it's confidently at least 80%, of stuff, and we find a home for you, unless.
Sure.
Now, I've had experiences as section chairs before, coming up where I've had people put in abstracts. It's like, I'm going to put in something, so I'm just going to put my name in right here, and I'll give you a talk, but I'll tell you what it's going to be about later. And I look at that and I'm like, nope, I'm going to reject that all day long because I want to know what it is that you're talking about.
Sure.
Put forth the effort. But that's a problem that I have with the SAS, the 30-year SAS career professional class, is that they have a name, they know, they're putting forth things, and they're just putting in, say, I'll be a part of your program if you want me. I'll tell you what I'm going to do later. And I have a lot less respect for that. I want you to tell me what it is that you're planning to give, so I know
Sure.
what that looks like. But that's a minor thing that only happens to a very small portion, a very tiny. I think it's happened to me twice or three times, and I joined. I started, my first SESUG was in 2010. I've been to every SESUG since. I chaired the 2017 conference. So I joined the EC around 2016. So it's been, 5 years or so. And now I've stepped in my first year as president on some of this.
Cool. So then let's do this. Let's try and get to the core of this. The most important thing right now is call for papers.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
So after call for papers, then typically somebody's going to get notified about what transpired with their submission. And then eventually we're going to have the registration be open. And so that's coming down the line. But let's, again, focus on call for papers. What at the basic level does somebody who's pondering submitting a paper to be included in the CSUG agenda, what are the basics that they need to do to meet that criteria for your team?
Sure. So ideas first, right? Think about the projects that you're working on, the things that you're doing, and something that you want to talk about. Don't even think about whether or not it's interesting to other people or useful or any of that. Start with your projects, the things you're working on, and think about something that you would like to share. Okay. Then our website, www.sesug.org. Go. We have, I'm looking at it now, we have our academic sections open there. So when you go to the website, there's a thing where you can click on academic sections and you can kind of see, some of the broad categories and some descriptions as to what's in there. If your topic naturally fits into what you see in there, then, go ahead and start writing it up and submit that abstract. Like just sit down and do it. You can tweak it later. You can make it sound more professional later, but go ahead and sit down and give us an idea of what it is that you want to do and what that abstract's going to be. It does not have to be super polished at the initial submission. You have time to get there. So especially for those that are hesitant, it's always, I write a lot for government reports and stuff. It's that first sentence that's always the hardest to do. Like, what's my framing statement to make it sound neat and sexy and cool? And I don't need that right now. I just need to know what it is that you want to talk about, what it is that you're working on, and keep it within the time constraints. And then if you've got something that you want to talk about, you're not sure where the things fit, we have an academic chair and an operations chair. This is part of their purview and what they do. So, don't hesitate to shoot them an email and say, I'm thinking about submitting on this. What section should I sort of submit that to, or something like that. And again, the SAS, for those that aren't super familiar with user group meetings, those submissions run the entire gamut. We have papers and presentations that are only 5 minutes long, and we have papers and presentations that are 10 minutes long and 15 minutes long and 20 minutes long and 50 minutes long, right? There is a place for all of it. And we have e-posters, and we don't usually get but a dozen or so e-posters a year for the face-to-face conference. I'm hoping for the virtual conference that we'll get a whole bunch of e-posters, because we can take students from all over, and not just students but junior professionals and stuff. I actually find that the e-posters are an easier abstract to submit, but they're actually a harder lift to do, because you want to make it look good, you want to all of that, and I feel like but start there, right? Like, we're big tent. We just where I want people to start thinking about is, this is something that I would like to share, and push away, like, is it novel? Is it useful? Is it usable? Let's see the abstract and figure that out, because I'm not an expert on all of these things. My programming and macros is terrible. Actually, overall, as a programmer, I make a good statistician. So, if you want to talk to me and ask me about what's in the statistical modeling procedures in SAS, I could talk to you about those all day long. But if you're going to ask me about what's the right way to do SQL joins, like, I'm going to be SAS on one screen and Google on the other. And I'm the president of the Southeast SAS Users Group. So people tend to think like, oh, he knows all this stuff. I don't.
So then I want to clarify for people, because I think that's everything that you just said is really important to put it in, for them to put it into scope. An abstract at this stage, you're just looking for how many paragraphs? 2, 3, 4? I mean, what do they really need to submit? Like you said, it doesn't have to be polished, so the bar's gotten lower, right? This doesn't have to be finished yet, because it has to be picked first, so the bar's gotten lower. So what are you looking for? 5 pages, 4 paragraphs? Where are we?
I mean, certainly closer to, the abstract has a word count, which I can't access right this second, but we're talking a couple of paragraphs, right? That's what we're talking about. It's a couple of paragraphs in the submission, and it should be clear what it is that you're talking about. Give me a paragraph as to what the problem is. If you're working in healthcare, if you're working in government or banking or education or whatever, I have this problem. There's this issue that happens with my data all the time, and so we use this technique to do it, and I think it's really cool. And we'll help you sort of figure out some of the rest. Especially if it's novel. especially in those cases where people have had to write some of their own homegrown things, right? I had to write this macro, and now my company uses it all the time for this thing. I want to see that macro because somebody else may need to use it, or they might
Well,
say,
but now
yeah,
you brought up something else though.
yep,
So one question that I get from users pretty consistently about abstracts is, Zeke, how do I write an abstract and convince my boss for the company that I work for that it's okay to share this information or this example or this thing that I solved at work? I know Zeke know what to tell my users. What do you tell your users? I love hearing these answers, and I want other users to hear what they should say.
yeah. I think this is a very tough realm. There's a company culture that a lot of folks have to work across anyway, and so there's going to be certain companies that are just not as forthgiving with their technical pieces of information. But I tend to find that users can make their code and their examples very generic, and that's the ticket here is to not necessarily talk about the client projects that you're doing or the application specifically, but it's usually the coding or technical minutia of what it is that you're trying to describe that has been your time saver or your advantage. So that's the sort of piece to focus on and say this is not about giving away some sort of company proprietary technology or intellectual technology or IP or any of that stuff. This is about sharing tricks and tips to make things go faster, and we can take more generic examples of stuff. So if you don't feel like your boss is going to get you there on the company example, see if you can pivot to a generic example that doesn't involve the company that showcases your technical savvy. So I think there's a larger problem here in terms of getting your boss to have buy-in that going to a regional user group or in getting involved with any SAS user group is something that's advantageous to the company. And that's something that local user groups, regional user groups, the Global Forum Committee, all of those are things that we all concern ourselves all the time with is how to see folks who don't use SAS see that there is a value add for this for the SAS users that they have at their company.
Yep. No, and I agree. It is a challenge. One of the things that I explain to people is that in my response to that challenge of that issue of how do I disclose something that I know my boss is going to say I can't disclose, use the data in SAS help dot something, and then don't use terminology or topics of the company or the team. Like you said, just explain the idea.
Yep.
Make it very nebulous and just talk about the idea, because that's all we really want. We don't need to know patient IDs or confidential this or confidential that.
Nope.
Just find some data that's safe, that's already part of the SAS ecosystem anyway, and talk about the problem and the solution, and there you go.
Yep.
And one of the reasons why I suggest people do write an abstract is it is a lot easier to convince your boss to let you go to these conferences if you've been picked to speak.
That's right.
That solves half your problem right there.
Absolutely. And let me add to that. Like the two things that I tell people about all of this is that, you want your boss to understand that, you're a technical expert in SAS and that disseminating some of that adds to their reputation capital by saying that we have expert SAS programmers, we have SAS users who deliver their content for other people at conferences. So we are a trusted group of individuals with experts on things. And then beyond that, I think everybody kind of understands that you can't be an expert at everything simultaneously all at once. So these meetings are also sort of key in getting that additional training. So while you're sharing the things that you're good at, you're also shoring up those gaps in places where you're not as good. So you actually become a better performer on your job by seeing and interacting with some of all of that. And I think that and that's also good for professional development. I think if you're staff managers that understand what employees do every day, they get it and they understand the need for those professional development. I think what we're talking about in these scenarios, many of them where we have people that say, I don't know if I can get my boss on board to present, or I can get my boss on board to let me go. And I think the disconnect there is that we have, and this is all through all sectors of business, government, industry. We have, and this is not just to the SAS user community, but it's that, we have folks that get staff managed and their bosses don't understand necessarily what they do all day, and that's the communication gap. Like, I brought you in to do this thing, you're very good at it, but I don't understand it, but I need you for it. And so the communication there is that the value add with any of these, and SESUG especially, because of the kind of things that we're trying to put in, is give you opportunities to present, to be a part of the program, so that your company can say, hey, look, we have this person and they're doing this thing. And then we give you opportunities to learn more, to fill in those gaps. Now, and those gaps can be anywhere. New users, seasoned users. Every time I go to a CSUG meeting, I learn something new.
Yep. And I got to say, one thing that I believe is happening usually is there's a myth. The person who wishes to be a speaker or presenter is actually hiding behind a myth for any number of reasons, and they believe their boss will say no.
Yeah.
I actually believe their boss will say yes. Most companies and most managers understand the value of having their team be recognized by a regional group or SAS Global Forum and being picked as speakers or presenters.
Absolutely.
That I would encourage people to write the abstract and to submit it to their boss and say, this is what I want to share, and it doesn't disrupt company issues or company policies. Sign it and approve it. And I bet you your company has a policy that allows you to do stuff like that anyway, because most companies want you to. And then your boss will be part of that submission process where they'll know you submitted a paper.
Yeah.
And more often than not, your HR process and your own employee development, team development, will include places where you can do things like that. And you've now proven that you've tried, right? So I would encourage most people who feel like they believe the myth to try and prove me wrong, that
That's right.
that it actually is true. And I bet you most often they find that it is a myth, and that they actually will get a lot of support from their managers and from their company to produce a great presentation. Most companies have, this is how we'd like you to present. This is how we want you to mention the name of the company. By the way, when you're done with your topic, mention that we're hiring. There's all these little things that suddenly, once you get picked, there's
Yep.
all sorts of support coming out of everywhere to get you to have a great presentation, and suddenly you're the rock star. So I keep telling people, I dare you to prove that it isn't a myth. I think it's a myth, and I think you should try. So
And we're different. Again, coming back to this idea of maybe your boss don't necessarily understand what you do all day. You write an abstract and you send it to him or her, and they look at it and they say, I can't believe there's a group of people that would want to learn about this. Yeah, sure, go forth. I don't know why anybody would want to sit in on that, but I will tell you that lots of users do. And the greatest thing that I have seen sitting on the CSUG EC side of things is working with hotels that do conferences a lot. And more than once, we've had conference hotel people come to us during the conference and say, wow, oh my gosh, how are you getting your attendees to go to your sessions? People come to talks and they come to conferences so that they can go visit cities and eat fancy food and travel and do all of that. And we see that with conferences over and over. And now with your conference, we have to worry about whether or not we have to post somebody outside the door of one of the rooms because the room is at capacity. Like, what's your secret? And we have to tell them that these are technical talks for technical people that want to learn from each other and want to engage with one another. And that's the thing that I get most excited about. And that's the thing that the newer users don't immediately see until they get full into the process. Submit that abstract, work on that paper or poster. If you need a mentor, reach out to people. There's lots of opportunities for growth here. And it's really dependent on what you avail yourself of.
And I think that's the important part to close on, is that really it is called today the Southeast SAS Users Group, but it is everybody's SAS Users Group, right? I mean, it's what you want to put into it, and you're telling us from the start you want fresh input. So I admire that and I support that, and I'm excited to see what's ahead for your group and for our group, the community. So thank you for joining today. I really appreciate it. We're going to work together to cobble this into something that we can share with people and have them take a look at it and hear from you and from what we've learned today. And again, thanks for your time. Um, we'll make sure to add the right links and URLs to this for everybody to have. Is there anything else you want to say before we wrap it up today?
No, this has been excellent. Thank you so much. Just users come out and engage online, engage in conferences, like just take that step into the community. We're waiting for you. We want you here.
I agree. I agree. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Jason, for joining, and we will catch up soon.
All right.